My own son called me a burden, right here in the house I built after returning from Vietnam. I smiled and said nothing. But that night, I changed every lock in this house and made a decision he'd never forget. You know, I'm sitting here on my front porch right now, watching that old American flag flutter in the evening breeze, and I can't help but think about how we got to that moment 3 weeks ago. Let me back up a bit. Name's Jim Patterson, and I'm 72 years old. Spent 2 tours in Vietnam with the Marines. Came home in 71 with more scars than I care to count, and a head full of memories I wish I could forget. But I'm getting ahead of myself here. When I got back stateside, everything felt different. The country I'd fought for seemed to have moved on without me, and folks looked at us Vietnam vets like we were carrying some kind of disease. Maybe we were. Maybe that disease was called seeing too much, too young. I remember walking through the airport in San Francisco, still in my dress blues, and having some college kid spit at my feet and call me a baby killer. That's when I knew I needed to find a place where I could build something good, something clean. So I took what little money the government gave me, added my combat pay savings, and bought a piece of land outside Sacramento. 2 acres of nothing but dry grass and a few stubborn oak trees. The real estate guy thought I was crazy. "What you gonna do with this, son?" he asked, scratching his head under his greasy hat. I looked him straight in the eye and said, "I'm gonna build a home." And that's exactly what I did. Every nail hammered with my own hands, every board measured twice and cut once, just like my old man taught me before he died when I was 16. Took me 3 years, working mostly weekends and evenings after my job at the lumber mill. I'd get home, wash the sawdust off my hands, grab my tools, and work until it got too dark to see. Sometimes I'd rig up some lights and work even later, because building that house was the only thing that made the nightmares quiet down. I remember the day I poured the foundation. It was hot as hell, must have been pushing 100 degrees, and I was out there with a wheelbarrow and a couple of local boys I'd hired for the day. One of them, kid named Bobby, kept asking me why I didn't just buy a house that was already built. "Seems like a lot of work, Mr. Patterson," he said, wiping sweat from his forehead. I stopped what I was doing and looked at that young man. "Son," I said, "when you come back from a place where everything's been torn down, sometimes the only way to heal is to build something up." The house started taking shape slowly. First the frame, then the walls, then the roof. I remember standing in what would become the living room one evening. Just me and the studs and the smell of fresh lumber, and thinking that maybe, just maybe, I was going to be okay. The shadows from the setting sun cut through the frame like prison bars, but for the first time since I'd been back, those shadows didn't scare me. I met my wife, Sarah, at the hardware store during year 2 of construction. She was there buying paint for her apartment, and I was picking up some electrical wire. She watched me load about 50 pounds of copper wire into my cart and asked what I was building. When I told her I was wiring my own house, she laughed and said I must be either very brave or very foolish. "Maybe both," I said, and she smiled. That smile lit up something inside me that I thought had died somewhere in the jungles of Southeast Asia. Sarah started coming by on weekends to watch me work. At first she'd just bring lemonade and sit on an old milk crate, but before long she was handing me tools and holding boards steady while I measured. She had these small, delicate hands, but they were strong. "Piano player's hands," she told me. Used to play at her church every Sunday before she moved to California. We got married in that half-finished house in the spring of '74. Just us, a justice of the peace, and about 20 friends gathered in what would become our kitchen. The walls were up but not painted, and you could still see the studs in places where I hadn't put up the drywall yet. Sarah wore a simple white dress she'd bought at JCPenney, and I wore my dress blues one last time. When the justice asked if I would love and honor this woman, I looked around at those bare walls and said, "Sir, I'll spend the rest of my life building a home worthy of her." And I did. Every room in that house was crafted with love. The kitchen where Sarah would spend hours making her famous apple pies, with custom cabinets I built to exactly her height, so she wouldn't have to strain her back. The living room with the big stone fireplace where we'd sit on winter evenings, her reading her romance novels, and me working on my model airplanes. The master bedroom where both our children were conceived, with windows facing east, so Sarah could watch the sunrise while she nursed them. Mike was born in '76, right after I finished the master bathroom. Sarah went into labor at 2 in the morning, and I'll never forget carrying her to the car through the house I'd built with my own hands, thinking that this place was about to become truly alive. Lisa came along 2 years later, during a spring when the oak trees in our yard were fuller and greener than I'd ever seen them. Those kids grew up in every corner of that house. Mike took his first steps across the living room floor I'd sanded and stained 3 times to get it perfect. Lisa said her first word, "Daddy," while sitting in the breakfast nook I'd built with a little bench seat so she could watch me cook Sunday morning pancakes. I taught Mike to ride his bike in our long driveway, running behind him with my hand on his back, until one day I let go and watched him pedal away on his own, his laughter echoing off the house like music. I added on over the years as the family grew and changed. A den where Mike could practice his guitar, much to Sarah's occasional annoyance. A craft room for Lisa's endless art projects. A workshop in the garage where I taught both kids to use tools properly and safely. Measure twice, cut once became our family motto, painted on a sign that hung over my workbench. The house was more than just wood and nails to me. It was proof that something good could come from someone who'd seen the worst humanity had to offer. Every time I looked at those walls, I saw the hands that had built them. Hands that had once held an M16 in a jungle on the other side of the world, but had learned to hold a hammer in service of love instead of a weapon in service of war. Sarah and I raised those kids to understand the value of hard work and respect. Mike played football in high school and went on to study business at UC Davis. Lisa was our artist, always drawing or painting, and she got a scholarship to art school down in Los Angeles. Both of them knew that their old man had fought in Vietnam, but we didn't talk about it much. Some stories are better left buried, especially when you're trying to build a peaceful life. I remember one evening when a realtor had called during dinner, some slick-talking guy who'd heard about our charming vintage home and wanted to discuss our options. Sarah grabbed the phone from me before I could hang up and said, "Listen here, mister. If my husband ever sells this house, I'll haunt you forever. This man built every inch of this place with his own hands, and it'll be mine until the day I die." Then she hung up and winked at me. "Just wanted to make our position clear, honey." The kids moved out in the late '90s. Mike got married to a woman named Jennifer and moved to San Jose to work for some tech company. Lisa married her college boyfriend and moved to Portland, where she teaches art at a community college. Sarah and I became empty nesters. But we were okay with that. We'd done our job. The house felt bigger without the kids, but it still felt like home. Sarah got sick in 2018, breast cancer. We fought it together for 2 years, turning the den into a makeshift medical room when she got too weak to climb the stairs to our bedroom. I slept on the couch for 6 months so I could be close to her, and I learned to cook her favorite meals when she lost her appetite from the chemo. The house that had seen so much joy suddenly became a place of quiet battles and whispered prayers. She died on a Tuesday morning in March of 2020, just as the whole world was shutting down for that virus. The funeral was small because of all the restrictions. Just me and the kids, and a few neighbors who'd known her for decades. We buried her in the cemetery about 10 miles from the house, under an oak tree that reminded me of the ones in our yard. I drove home alone that day and sat in the kitchen for hours, listening to the silence and wondering what the hell I was supposed to do with a house that had been built for a family, but now sheltered just one old man. The first year after Sarah died was the hardest. Mike and Lisa called regularly, but they had their own lives, their own problems. Mike's tech company was struggling, and Lisa was dealing with budget cuts at her school. I understood. I'd raised them to be independent, to build their own lives. But sometimes, sitting alone in that living room where we'd celebrated so many Christmases and birthdays, I felt like I was rattling around in a museum of memories. That's when the conversation started. Little comments at first, during phone calls or visits. Mike would mention how big the house seemed for just one person. Lisa would talk about how much maintenance old houses needed. They were careful about it at first, diplomatic. But I could hear what they were really saying underneath all the polite words. The breaking point came 3 weeks ago. Mike and Lisa had driven up together, the first time they'd both been in the house at the same time since their mother's funeral. We were sitting around the dining room table I'd built from a single piece of oak I'd milled myself, eating Chinese takeout because none of us had felt like cooking. "Dad," Mike said, setting down his chopsticks, "we need to talk." I looked at my son, my boy who'd grown into a 45-year-old man with thinning hair and tired eyes, and I knew what was coming. But I let him say it anyway. "This house is too big for you now," he continued, "and it's getting old. I know you've maintained it well, but there's going to be major repairs coming up. The roof, the foundation, the electrical system. It's all from the 70s. Lisa nodded along. "We've been looking at some really nice assisted living places, Dad. Nice communities with people your age, activities, medical care right on site. You wouldn't have to worry about maintaining this big old house anymore." I kept eating my sweet and sour pork, chewing slowly, letting them talk. They had it all figured out, apparently. There was a place in Roseville with a golf course and a dining hall. Another one in Davis that offered art classes that Lisa thought I might enjoy. They'd already done the research, already made calls. "And honestly, Dad," Mike said, glancing at his sister, "the real estate market is crazy right now. This house is worth 3 times what you paid for that land back in the 70s. You could sell it, invest the money, and have more than enough to pay for a really nice place with money left over for us kids." That's when he said it. The thing that's been echoing in my head for 3 weeks now. "Come on, Dad. You're getting too old for this house. It's become a burden. And honestly, you too." I looked at my son across the table I'd built, in the house I'd built, and I felt something cold settle in my chest. Not anger, exactly. More like a deep disappointment that cut right through me. Here was the boy I'd taught to swing a hammer, who'd helped me re-shingle the garage roof when he was 16, telling me that the home I'd built with my own hands was a burden, telling me that I was a burden. I smiled, not because I was happy, but because sometimes, when you've been hit that hard, smiling is the only thing that keeps you from falling apart right there at the table. "Well," I said, taking another bite, "that's certainly something to think about." They spent the rest of the evening showing me brochures and websites on Lisa's laptop, glossy photos of smiling old people playing shuffleboard and doing water aerobics, clean, sterile rooms that all looked exactly the same, activities calendars full of bingo games and movie nights featuring films from 20 years ago. I nodded and made appropriate noises, but my mind was elsewhere. I was thinking about the summer I'd spent installing the kitchen cabinets, how I'd had to remake the corner cabinet 3 times because I couldn't get the angles right. I was thinking about the winter when Lisa was 8 and had pneumonia, how Sarah and I had taken turns sitting up with her in the living room because it was warmer than her bedroom. I was thinking about the morning after Mike's high school graduation, when I'd found him sitting on the front porch at sunrise, still in his cap and gown, and we'd talked for 2 hours about his plans for college and his fears about leaving home. This house wasn't just a building. It was my life's work. It was the physical manifestation of everything I'd learned about love and commitment and perseverance. It was proof that a man who'd seen the worst of humanity could come home and build something beautiful. After Mike and Lisa left that night, I sat in my workshop and really looked at my tools for the first time in months. My father's hammer, which had built this house alongside my own sweat and determination. The level that had never lied to me, not once in 50 years. The measuring tape with the worn metal case that fit perfectly in my palm. These tools had built something real and lasting. They'd built a home. That's when I made the decision. I wasn't going anywhere. This house was mine, built with my hands, paid for with my money, filled with my memories. If my children couldn't understand the difference between a burden and a legacy, then maybe it was time they learned. The next morning, I drove to the office of Tom Bradley, an old Marine buddy who'd become a lawyer after the war. Tom and I had served together in Da Nang, and he'd always told me that if I ever needed legal help, he was my man. His secretary tried to make me an appointment for the following week, but when Tom heard I was there, he came right out to the waiting room. "Jimmy Patterson," he said, grabbing my hand in both of his. "What brings you to my humble office?" I explained the situation, and Tom's expression grew serious. He pulled out a legal pad and started taking notes. "Have you signed anything?" he asked. "Given them power of attorney? Added their names to the deed?" "Hell no," I said. "This is still my house, far as I know." Tom smiled. "It certainly is. And unless you've been declared mentally incompetent by a court, which you obviously haven't, they have exactly zero legal right to force you to sell or move. This house is your property, Jim. You can live in it until the day you die if you want to." "That's exactly what I plan to do," I said. Tom drew up some paperwork that afternoon, making my wishes crystal clear in legal language. No one could force me to sell my house. No one could move me to a nursing home against my will. The house was mine, period, end of discussion. But the legal stuff was just the beginning. I had a bigger point to make. That weekend, I drove to Home Depot and bought new locks for every door in the house. Heavy-duty deadbolts that would take a battering ram to get through. I also bought a security system, one of those new digital ones with cameras and smartphone alerts. If my own children thought I was too old and feeble to take care of myself, well, I'd show them just how capable this old Marine could be. Saturday night, after it got dark, I changed every lock in the house. Front door, back door, side door from the garage. Took me about 3 hours, working by the light of my old shop lamp. My hands weren't as steady as they'd been 30 years ago, but they remembered how to use a screwdriver just fine. My neighbor Bob Henderson came over around 10, probably wondering what all the noise was about. "Working late tonight, Jim?" he called over the fence. "Just making some security improvements," I called back, holding up my drill. "You know, Bob, it's funny. These hands once fixed rifles under fire in the jungle. Now they're fixing door locks to keep my own kids out." I laughed, and Bob shook his head with a grin. "Family troubles?" he asked. "Family lessons," I corrected. "Sometimes the people who love you most forget that you're still capable of taking care of yourself." I also installed the security system, positioning cameras to cover all the approaches to the house. The young man who'd sold it to me at Home Depot had tried to talk me into professional installation, but I'd just laughed. "Son," I'd told him, "I wired this whole house when Gerald Ford was president. I think I can handle a few security cameras." Sunday morning, I sat on my front porch with my coffee and waited. Mike had called Saturday night to say he'd be coming by around 10 to continue our conversation about your living situation. I'd told him I'd be here. He pulled into the driveway right on time, Jennifer in the passenger seat. They walked up to the front door like they owned the place, Mike fishing in his pocket for the spare key I'd given him years ago. He put it in the lock, turned it, and nothing happened. He tried again, jiggling the key and pushing on the door. "That's funny," I heard him say to Jennifer. "The key isn't working." I watched from my chair as he walked around to the back door, then the side door, trying the same key at each one. When he came back around front, his face was red and he was starting to look frustrated. "Dad," he called out, "my key doesn't work." I stood up slowly, set my coffee cup on the little table beside my chair, and walked over to the porch railing. "I know," I said. "I changed the locks." The look on his face was something I'll remember for the rest of my life. Confusion, then anger, then a kind of shocked disbelief. "You what?" "I changed the locks," I repeated calmly. "This is my house, son, built by my hands, with my blood and sweat. It's not for sale, and if I'm a burden, well, then so be it. But I'll be a burden in my own house." Mike's mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. Jennifer stood behind him, looking uncomfortable and confused. "Dad, you can't just lock us out of the house," Mike said, his voice getting louder. "We're your family." "You're absolutely right," I said. "You are my family, and you're welcome to visit my house anytime you'd like, just like any other guests. But if you're coming here to try to convince me to sell my home and move to some old folks' warehouse, then you can turn around and drive back to San Jose." Mike pulled out his phone and called Lisa. I could hear him explaining the situation, his voice getting more agitated by the minute. Then he held the phone out to me. "Lisa wants to talk to you," he said. I walked down from the porch and took the phone. "Hi, sweetheart," I said. "Dad, what are you doing?" Lisa's voice was strained. "Mike says you've locked us out of the house." "I've secured my property," I said. "There's a difference." "Dad, we're just trying to help you. We're worried about you living alone in that big house." "I appreciate your concern, Lisa. I really do. But I've been taking care of myself since before you were born, and I'm perfectly capable of continuing to do so. This house isn't just where I live. It's who I am. It's the thing I'm most proud of in this world, besides you and your brother." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. "We just want what's best for you," she said finally, and I could hear tears in her voice. "I know you do, honey. But what's best for me is staying in the home I built for our family. The home where you took your first steps and said your first words. The home where your mother and I raised you to be the good people you are today." I handed the phone back to Mike, who talked to his sister for a few more minutes before hanging up. "Dad," he said, "this is crazy. You can't just lock yourself in that house like some kind of hermit." "I'm not locked in," I said. "I'm just making sure that unwelcome visitors stay out." Mike and Jennifer stood there for another few minutes, Mike trying different approaches and arguments. He threatened to call Adult Protective Services. He suggested that I might be having mental health issues. He even hinted that he might contest my competency in court. That's when I smiled again, a real smile this time. "Son," I said, "yesterday I consulted with an attorney who confirmed that this house is my legal property and that no one can force me to sell it or leave it against my will. Today I installed a new security system with cameras that are recording this entire conversation. If you want to try to have me declared mentally incompetent, you're welcome to try. But I think you'll find that a man who can change his own locks, install his own security system, and protect his own property rights is probably pretty competent." The fight went out of Mike's eyes then. He looked at me standing there on my own front porch, in front of the house I'd built with my own hands, and I think he finally understood that his old man wasn't quite as feeble as he'd assumed. "Fine," he said. "But don't come crying to us when something happens and you can't take care of yourself." "I won't," I said, "but you're always welcome to visit, as long as you come as my son who loves me, not as a salesman trying to get me to give up my home." They drove away, and I went back to my coffee and my morning paper. The house felt different somehow. Not empty, exactly, but mine. Completely mine for the first time since Sarah had died. Over the next couple of weeks, I got a few phone calls from Mike and Lisa. Tense conversations where they tried different tactics to change my mind. Lisa was more emotional, talking about how worried she was and how she didn't understand why I was being so stubborn. Mike was more analytical, running through scenarios and arguing about maintenance costs and property taxes and the likelihood of me falling down the stairs. I listened to all of it patiently, but my answer never changed. This was my house. I'd built it, I'd maintained it, and I'd live in it until I died. End of discussion. Then, about a week ago, something wonderful happened. I got a letter in the mail, addressed in handwriting I didn't recognize. When I opened it, it was from my grandson, Mike's boy, Tyler. He's 15 now, a sophomore in high school, and he'd written me a letter by hand. "Dear Grandpa," it began. "I heard about what happened with Dad and Aunt Lisa trying to get you to sell your house. I just wanted you to know that I think you did the right thing. I remember when I was little, and you showed me all around the house, and told me how you built it yourself after you came back from the war. You showed me the workshop and let me use your tools, and you taught me that a man should be proud of the things he builds with his own hands. I still have that birdhouse we made together when I was 8. It's hanging in my bedroom window, and every time I look at it, I think about you and what you taught me about working hard and doing things right. I know Dad thinks you should sell the house, but I understand why you won't. It's not just a house, it's your story. And nobody should have to give up their story just because they get old. I hope you stay in your house forever, because knowing that it's there, that you built it and you're taking care of it, makes me feel like our family has roots somewhere. Like we came from something solid and real. I love you, Grandpa. Stay strong. Your grandson, Tyler. I sat at my kitchen table and read that letter 3 times, and I'm not ashamed to say that I cried. Not from sadness, but from the overwhelming relief of being understood. This 15-year-old boy got it in a way that his father and aunt couldn't. He understood that this house wasn't just about studs and drywall and property values. It was about legacy. It was about a man building something good and lasting out of his own determination and love. I called Tyler that night. His father answered the phone, and there was a moment of awkward silence when he heard my voice. "Hi, Mike," I said. "I got Tyler's letter. I'd like to thank him for it, if that's okay." Mike was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Dad, I didn't know he'd written you a letter." "What did it say?" "It said that he understands why this house matters to me," I said, "and that he's proud to have a grandfather who builds things instead of just buying them." I heard Mike sigh. "Dad, Mike," I interrupted. "I'm not calling to fight with you. I'm calling to talk to my grandson. Can you put him on the phone?" Tyler and I talked for 20 minutes. He told me about school, about the girl he likes, about the model airplane he's building from a kit I'd sent him for his birthday. And he asked me about the house, about how I'd learned to do electrical work and plumbing and all the other trades that had gone into building it. "Grandpa," he said near the end of our conversation, "when I graduate from high school, could I come spend the summer with you? You could teach me how to do construction work. Maybe we could build something together." "I'd like that very much," I said, and I meant it. Here was a young man who wanted to learn the skills that had built this house, who understood that working with your hands was something to be proud of, not ashamed of. After I hung up the phone, I walked through my house with new eyes. I saw it not as a burden or a maintenance problem, but as what it had always been. A testament to the idea that a man who'd been broken by war could come home and build something beautiful. A place where love had lived and grown, a legacy worth preserving. The next morning, I called Mike. "Son," I said, "I want you to know something. I'm not staying in this house to spite you or to be stubborn. I'm staying because this house is my life's work. It's the proof that I was here, that I mattered, that I could create something good in this world. When I die, and we both know that's going to happen sooner rather than later, this house will be yours and Lisa's. You can sell it then if you want to. But while I'm alive, it's mine. And I'm asking you, as my son, to respect that." There was a long silence on the other end of the line. "Dad," Mike said finally, "I'm sorry about what I said, about you being a burden. That was cruel, and it wasn't true. Apology accepted," I said. "But I want you to understand something. When you called me a burden, you weren't just insulting me. You were insulting every nail I hammered, every board I cut, every late night I spent making sure this house would be strong enough and beautiful enough for our family. You were calling my life's work worthless." "I didn't mean it that way," Mike said, and I could hear the regret in his voice. "I know you didn't," I said. "But that's how it felt. This house isn't just where I live, son. It's who I am." We talked for another few minutes, and by the end of the conversation, we'd reached an understanding. Mike and Lisa would stop pressuring me to sell the house. I would make sure my will was up to date, and that they knew where all my important papers were. And Tyler would be welcome to come spend the summer with me, learning the trades that had built our family home. 2 days ago, Mike and Lisa drove up together again. This time, they knocked on the front door like proper visitors. I let them in, and we sat in the living room drinking coffee and eating some cookies that my neighbor Mrs. Henderson had brought over. "Dad," Lisa said, "we owe you an apology. We were so focused on what we thought was practical that we forgot what this house means to you. What it means to all of us, really." She looked around the room, her eyes stopping on the mantel above the fireplace where our family photos were displayed. Pictures of birthday parties and Christmas mornings, Little League games and school plays, all of them taken in this house. "I had my first kiss on that front porch," she said softly. "Tommy Martinez, when I was 14. I was so nervous I thought I was going to throw up, but you'd built that porch so solid it didn't even creak when we sat down on the steps." Mike laughed. "I remember hiding behind that oak tree in the front yard, spying on you." "You remember building that treehouse with me in the backyard?" Lisa asked Mike. "Dad spent 3 weekends helping us get it right, even though he'd worked all week and probably just wanted to rest." "I remember him teaching me to use the circular saw," Mike said. "I was so scared I was going to cut my finger off, but he stood right behind me, his hands over mine, showing me how to guide the wood. 'Measure twice, cut once,' he kept saying. 'Measure twice, cut once,' I repeated. Still good advice." We spent the afternoon looking through old photo albums and talking about memories. The time Mike had tried to help me install new kitchen cabinets when he was 10 and had accidentally put wood glue in his hair. The Christmas when Lisa had gotten food poisoning and thrown up all over the bathroom I'd tiled myself, and how I'd spent Christmas morning cleaning grout and telling her it was okay. That's what dads were for. The summer we'd added the deck out back, and how the whole family had worked together to stain it, looking like we'd all been attacked by a tribe of wood-colored painters. "Dad," Mike said as they were getting ready to leave, "I want you to know that I'm proud of this house. I'm proud that my father built it with his own hands, and I'm sorry it took me so long to remember that." "I'm proud of it too," Lisa said, "and I want Tyler to learn from you. I want him to understand that building something yourself, creating something that lasts, is one of the most important things a person can do." After they left, I sat on my front porch as the sun was setting, watching that flag wave in the evening breeze. The same flag I'd raised on a pole I'd installed myself the day after we moved in, almost 50 years ago. I thought about all the years I'd spent maintaining this house, updating it, improving it. The new roof I'd put on in the 90s. The bathroom I'd remodeled when Sarah's arthritis made it hard for her to step over the old tub. The wheelchair ramp I'd built in the last year of her life, when walking became too difficult. This house had grown and changed with our family's needs, but it had always been solid, always been home. It had weathered storms and earthquakes, floods and droughts. It had protected us and sheltered us and given us a place to be a family. And now, in the last chapter of my life, it was protecting me one more time. Not from the weather or natural disasters, but from well-meaning children who thought they knew what was best for their old man. It was keeping me anchored to the life I'd built, the legacy I'd created with my own hands. You know, people talk a lot these days about finding yourself, about discovering who you are. But I've never been confused about that. I am the man who came home from a war and decided to build something instead of destroying something. I am the man who took a piece of empty land and turned it into a home. I am the man who taught his children that hard work and love could create something beautiful and lasting. This house is my autobiography written in wood and stone and sweat. Every room tells a story about who I was and who I became. The workshop where I taught my children to use tools. The kitchen where my wife baked countless birthday cakes. The living room where we watched our kids grow up and where I held my wife's hand as she died. Some people might see an old man clinging to an outdated way of life, refusing to accept the reality of aging. But they'd be wrong. I'm not clinging to anything. I'm standing firm on the foundation I laid with my own hands, in the house I built with my own sweat, surrounded by the memories I created with my own choices. My son called me a burden, and maybe in some ways I am. Maybe we all become burdens eventually, when our bodies start failing and our minds start slowing down. But this house I built will outlast me. It will outlast my children, probably. And someday, maybe Tyler will bring his children here and tell them about their great-grandfather, who came home from a war and built a home with his bare hands. Maybe they'll understand that a man's worth isn't measured by how little trouble he causes, but by what he leaves behind. So here I sit on my front porch in the house I built after returning from Vietnam, watching my flag wave in the evening breeze. My children have learned to respect my choice to stay here. My grandson wants to spend his summer learning the skills that built this place. And I am exactly where I belong. This house isn't just walls and a roof. It's my life, my story, and my legacy. And I'll be damned if I'm going to let anyone convince me that any of those things are a burden. Some things in this life are worth fighting for, worth standing firm for. For me, this house is one of those things. It's the proof that I was here, that I mattered, that I could build something good. And that, folks, is a lesson worth remembering. Whether you're building a house or a life or a relationship, the foundation matters. The craftsmanship matters. The love you put into it matters. And when someone tries to tell you that the thing you've built with your own hands and your own heart is worthless, well, that's when you smile politely and stand your ground. Because dignity and respect aren't negotiable. They're earned through a lifetime of work and choices and sacrifice. And they can't be taken away by anyone, not even by the people who love you most. That's my story, and I'm sticking to it. Just like I'm sticking to this house, this home, this testament to the idea that an old soldier can beat his sword into a hammer and build something beautiful. And you know what? If Tyler wants to keep building when he comes this summer, I'll teach him everything I know. Maybe one day, he'll tell his own kids about the great-grandfather who came home from war and chose to create instead of destroy. Maybe they'll understand that the best legacy you can leave isn't money in the bank. It's something solid and real that you built with your own hands and your own heart.